All right, everybody, today we're going to be taking a look and an early breakdown of the UFC 296 card, which takes place on December 16th, headlined by Leon Rocky Edwards defending his welterweight title against Colby Chaos Covington. We're going to be looking at the top 4 fights on the card, and we're going to kick it off with the fight you see right here on your screen in the welterweight division between the undefeated rising contender and Ian the Future Machado Gary, taking on a man coming off that dominant victory via decision over Rafael dos Anjos and Vicente the Silent Assassin Luque. Now, I'm going to be honest, I'm probably going to be a little bit biased here because I'm a huge Luque fan. I've always been a Luque fan. I've been a big fan of his ever since I saw him knock out Belal Muhammad back at UFC 205. And the one thing I will say is that there are some vulnerabilities in the defensive irresponsibility of Ian Gary where he can get caught by the left hook, and coincidentally that is Vicente Luque's best shot. He's very Thai style, light on the lead leg, but he kind of marches forward, uses a jab, uses a right low kick, can fire up with that right hand, but the bread and butter for him is that left hook. He likes to double it up off the jab. Sometimes he'll feint the right cross, throw the left hook. And the one thing we do know is that when Ian Gary fought Song Kenan was able to drop him bad, pretty much face plant him early in the fight, and it was due to a left hook. So he does have vulnerability on that right side, the left hand of Luque. And I do think that if they get into boxing range, and it's in close range, that's where Luque's going to have his best shot. I do think he has superior jiu-jitsu on the floor. I think we could see him maybe look to resort to some wrestling like we saw him use in the RDA fight. I think the wrestling would probably be a good thing to mix up so that Gary can't stay out at kicking range and kind of keep Luque at the end of his kicks and his punches. But the one thing I see is I feel like this is going to be kind of like the Wonder Boy fight, where Luque's going to have some moments. He's going to be able to close the distance at certain points, but if he can't knock out or take down and submit Ian Gary, he's going to get picked apart at that kicking range, the teep kicks, the head kicks, the 5-6 shot combinations that Ian Gary can showcase. I mean, this kid is good. He uses good stance changes, good footwork. He can mix up his boxing and his kickboxing, change stance mid combination, punctuate his combinations with kicks, come back with the hands. He's going to have an advantage in the overall technical aspects of the striking in this fight. He's going to have a reach advantage. He's going to have a range management advantage, which would, equate to a reach advantage as well. But at the same time, inside of that clinch range, inside of that boxing range, if he stays there for too long, Luque's going to be able to counter. He's going to be able to slip and roll and try to use that jab into the lead hook, try to use the uppercut into the lead hook, the 1-2, pull the 2 back, throw the left hook, throw the cross hook. I mean, that left hook is going to be a big weapon for Luque paired up with the rear low kick. It's going to be jab, lead hook, right low kick, cross hook, rear low kick, jab, hook, cross hook, low kick. Like, he's going to be putting those combinations together, and I do think that in the boxing range and in the wrestling and jiu-jitsu department, that is where Luque is going to have an advantage. We have seen Luque chin people in the past. We've seen Ian Gary get caught on the chin, but he hasn't been finished yet. I do think Luque possesses that, threat to Ian Gary to be able to finish him, but I just think it's going to be pretty difficult for him to close that distance off. I think he's going to get stuck at kicking range for the majority of the fight, and I think he's kind of going to get picked apart. I think there are going to be some aspects where Luque can maybe slip inside on a counter and land some big shots, and I am like a big Luque fan, but I can't lean him early. I'm going to go with Ian Gary to win this fight via third round TKO. I know Luque's never been finished, I know he hadn't been finished until that loss to Jeff Neal. I would really like to see Luque knock out Ian Gary. I'm not the biggest Ian Gary fan, and like I said, I am a big Vicente Luque fan. I've always been, but I do think this is a very tough matchup for him. I think if he uses his wrestling and grappling and pushes Ian Gary up against the cage, I think that would be a very smart option, because even if the takedowns don't work, you're at that close enough range to where you can strike off the break up against the cage and be able to land your in-close shots with the hooks, with the uppercuts, with the straights, the jab into the straight, into the lead hook. So I want Luque to win, but I am going to lean Ian Gary to get a late finish or potentially a decision. But it's very slight, man, because I do think Luque is live in this fight, but the pick is going to be Ian Gary, third round TKO for an early lean. All right, up next, we've got another battle in the welterweight division, and a man who we thought was going to be facing Ian Garry in the return of Stephen Wonderboy Thompson, coming off of that TKO in his last fight over Kevin Trailblazer Holland, going into round 5. I think it was a round 4 TKO. Going up against Shavkat Rakhmonov, coming off of that Fight of the Year contender back at UFC 285, I believe, with Jeff Hands of Steel Neal. And, you know, I think Wonderboy is live in certain aspects of this fight. I'm not going to lie. I feel like everybody kind of counts him out. But the best weapon for Shavkat Rakhmonov to use in this fight is to resort to his wrestling, resort to his grappling, push Wonderboy up against the cage, you know, use the inside and outside trips, try to use the Dagestani wrist ride, land ground and pound, and just control from the top position. We've always seen that the one way people are able to beat Stephen Thompson is by implementing their wrestling, implementing their grappling. I mean, look at the fights with Bilal Muhammad, the fight with Gilbert Burns. Like, the way that most guys are beating Wonderboy is by using the wrestling, using the grappling, and controlling them from the top position. If people stand and strike with Wonderboy, yeah, you can knock him out like Anthony Pettis did, but before Pettis knocked him out, he was getting pieced up. And look what happened to Kevin Holland. He dropped him, but he got stuck in the game of like the in and out counter fighting style against Wonderboy, and nobody can beat Wonderboy in a, you know, point fighting style of matchup or an in and out striking matchup where he's always going to be there to get off on that angle, the little quick dart into the right or straight right or straight left, the little quick step back, the 1-2 step into southpaw to the side kick with the right leg. Like, you're never going to beat Wonderboy in that type of fight. I do think that Rakhmonov can have some success on the feet based on his forward pressure. If he can push back Wonderboy, get in his face, and continue to back him up, like the fight with Jeff Neal, then yeah, he can have success because, you know, Jeff Neal and Shavkat, they kind of got in each other's face, but Shavkat was getting cracked with big punches by Jeff Neal, the counter-striking, but eventually the body work, just walking through all of his shots, even though he did get wobbled at multiple points in that fight, you know, he was able to just kind of break him. I think it's going to be harder to do that in a striking matchup against Wonderboy because Wonderboy is so used to being on that back foot, so he's going to have those back foot counters ready to go. But what Rakhmonov's probably going to want to do is back him up and pressure him, get Wonderboy to shoot out a counter, and then use that to either level change into the double leg, use that to close the distance into the over-under or the double-under clinch, and then use that to get the takedowns and work from the top position, grab the Dagestani wrist ride, throw your hooks in, flatten them out, and eventually look for a submission. I think the best option if you're looking to bet Rakhmonov is to bet Rakhmonov by submission, because I feel like he's not going to TKO or knock out Wonderboy. I mean, every dog has their day, and Wonderboy has been knocked out before, but I think that's a recipe for disaster, and that's a very risky move fighting one of the best strikers in the UFC, let alone in that welterweight division, who's got a very heavy counter-striking style. And with a fighter like Rakhmonov, who's going to move forward, who's going to be getting in his face, who's going to be putting that pressure on, it's going to open up the counter-striking options for Wonderboy. So I will say, Wonderboy is live. If Rakhmonov does not grapple, I could see Wonderboy either knocking out Rakhmonov or winning a decision, because he's going to be there to get hit, and Wonderboy's going to throw those counters, you know, left and right. But the grappling, the wrestling, the top control, you know, we've seen him use it in multiple fights before. I feel like that's what Rakhmonov's going to go to in this fight. I do think it's close, but if the grappling is used, it will not be close. So that would be the smartest option for Rakhmonov to use. But early pick, I'm going to go with Shavkat Rakhmonov to defeat Stephen Wonderboy Thompson via second round rear naked choke submission. I think he's just going to eventually get him on the floor, get his back, and choke him out. But if it stays striking, you might want to put a little money on Wonderboy. All right, up next, a battle in the lightweight division between Tony El Cucuy Ferguson and Paddy the Baddy Pimblett. I know Ferguson's been on a terrible run. He's lost his last 6 fights in a row, and coming from a guy who was on a, 12-13 fight unbeaten streak before he ran into Justin Gaethje, I feel like the Justin Gaethje fight just took a lot out of him. And I've listened to some interviews lately with Tony, and he said that, him not being able to fight Khabib, He feels like it took a part of him, but he switched up his coaching. He got back to the coaches that he needs to work on his defense, to work on his ability to hit and not get hit. And he seems like he's in a really good place going into this Pimblett fight. And the one thing I will say is that I know I've picked Paddy Pimblett in every one of his fights so far, but I've never been the biggest fan of Paddy Pimblett. I might have picked him, but I'm not the biggest fan of him. And if Tony Ferguson is on point, and it's a big if with a capital IF, he can beat Paddy Pimblett. He can knock out Paddy Pimblett. He can hurt him. He can submit him if he's on point. But at this point, do we have faith in Tony Ferguson to be on point after suffering all these losses, after turning away from punches, after getting hit, after getting subbed by Bobby Green? But that Bobby Green loss doesn't look that bad considering last night he just knocked out Grant Dawson in the first round in a fight where he was a huge underdog. So Bobby Green's legit, and Ferguson did hurt him and drop him at one point early in that fight. But some people believe it was more of a knockoff balance, but I think he just caught him on the chin as he was moving, and it was like a mixture of both. But Ferguson has better striking than Pimblett. Both fighters leave their chins in the air. Pimblett is more of straight punches, 1-2s, long rangy shots, teep kicks with the lead leg, front push kicks. Doesn't really throw a lot of head kicks or body kicks. It's kind of boxing, mixing up his combinations. And he is long and rangy, which is going to be a problem for Tony if he still can't get out of the way. I know that the smart pick for this fight is probably to go with Paddy Pimblett, but just based off the fact that I don't think Paddy's proven yet, I'm going to go with Ferguson to pull the upset. And I might look stupid, I might look like an idiot, but I'm going to go with Tony Ferguson to be able to catch Paddy Pimblett on the feet and knock him out. I feel like he's in a good place. I know we have a long way to go before fight night, but I feel like Tony can get one more solid win and then call it a career. I know he said he's nowhere near retiring, which is kind of worrisome because if he just keeps taking beatings, then who knows? It's not going to be good for him, and at this point, it's still not good for him, but I feel like he has the skill set to beat a guy like Pimblett. He's got more power on the feet. I feel like Pimblett might be a little bit technically better, but I feel like if Tony's defense is on point, he'll be able to hit Paddy Pimblett. He'll be able to hurt him. He'll be able to rock him. We've seen Paddy get rocked before. In the jiu-jitsu, I know Paddy's a great jiu-jitsu artist. He probably could submit him. But if Tony hurts him on the feet and then grabs his neck, snap down city, I think Tony's live in this one. I don't think it's the smartest pick. I wouldn't tell you to go run and bet on Tony Ferguson as the underdog, because I'm sure he'll be a 3-1, 4-1, 2.5, 3-1 underdog. But I'm going to lean Tony Ferguson to get this done by knockout. I think he finds the chin of Paddy Pimblett in the second round, catches him with his chin in the air, and knocks him out. And it's more based on the lack of faith and the lack of what I've seen from Pimblett so far against high-level competition, more than it is me really having faith in Ferguson to be able to pull this out. But I am going to go with El Kukui to get one more ride off into the sunset and knock out Paddy Pimblett in round 2. All right, the co-main event of the evening for the Flyweight Championship. It's going to be another banger. If you thought the last title fight between Alexandre Pantoja and Brandon Royval, where Pantoja was able to pull it out and win the title, was a close fight and a barn burner and an amazing fight, I think we're going to get another amazing flyweight title fight here between Royval and Pantoja. This is a rematch back from, I believe it was a UFC fight night. I don't have the date on the top of my head, but in that first fight, man, Pantoja was getting pieced up on the feet. He was getting, outlanded. He was getting rocked. He was getting hurt, but eventually Royval was too eager to scramble with Pantoja, which I think in certain aspects is a good thing because it shows that you're not afraid to go to the floor. It shows that you're not afraid to get into the wheelhouse of Pantoja, which is the grappling, the takedowns, the top control, putting the hooks in, controlling the wrists, looking for rear naked chokes, looking for arm bars, going to your back, looking for triangles. Like the submission and jiu-jitsu game of Pantoja is the best aspects of his game, and it shows that Royval wasn't scared. But the thing is, Royval's a very good submission artist. Royval has very good scrambles, but sometimes he gets a little bit overzealous. Sometimes he puts himself in positions that he doesn't need to because of that quote-unquote raw dog style where he's going to be rolling, scrambling, looking for arm bars, triangles, omoplatas, leg locks, giving up his back. The one thing you can't do is give up your back against a fighter in Pantoja, because the minute you give him your back, even if he doesn't sub you, he's going to put those hooks in, he's going to transition to that body triangle, and he's going to control you, and he's going to try to land shots off of your back, and he's going to try to just control and drain you until you eventually make a mistake and give him a chance to lock up a choke, just like the first fight between Pantoja and Royval. I do think Royval is live in this fight. He's fast, he's quick, he's creative on the feet. He throws knees from the lead and rear leg, just right up the middle, throws elbows, spinning elbows, uses that lead hand, kind of switches between stances, but he's mainly southpaw, uses the jab, check hook, the straight, uses the knee from the rear leg, just like he knocked out Mateus Nicolau with. Caught him with that knee right up the middle. Nicolau didn't see it coming, and he knocked him out cold. I think that aspect of the fight is going to be here again in the rematch against Pantoja. The knees up the middle, using the jab, using the hook, front kicks, teeps to the body, knees, lead elbows as Pantoja tries to close the distance, uppercuts and elbows, jabs, teeps, knees, like all that stuff is going to be there. I just don't think you want to get into that clinch range. You don't want to get into the, the over-unders, the body lock positions against Pantoja, because even though Royval is a really good jiu-jitsu artist, even though Royval can scramble very well, I think scrambling against a fighter in Pantoja who's as technical and dangerous on the mat is an issue. I could see Royval subbing him. I will say a little sneaky look on this fight, depending on what the odds are, would be Royval by submission, but I don't think he would get a submission by getting into a scramble with Pantoja. I think what would happen is they got into an exchange on the feet. Royval catches him with a big hook or catches him with the knee, and he drops him, and then he locks up his neck because he has a beautiful arm-in guillotine. We've seen him get it on fighters like Matt Danger Schnell, who's a good jiu-jitsu practitioner. We've seen him get the arm-in guillotines on Kai Kara France. We saw him catch Tim Elliott in, I believe it was an arm-in guillotine as well, or just a regular guillotine. Like, if he gets a hold of your neck, even if it's in that front headlock, it's a problem. But the technical prowess, the positional awareness of Pantoja is going to be a little bit too much if Royval just takes that wild approach. I don't think wild approaches on the grappling is a good idea. I do think wild approaches in certain aspects of the striking game can work for Royval against a fighter in Pantoja, because Pantoja's striking has gotten better. He has improved, and I think you saw that in his last fight where he won the title against Brandon Moreno, and I was pretty confident in Moreno to get that done. But the one thing is Pantoja's so durable. It's hard to finish a guy like that. It's hard to finish somebody like a Pantoja, but I do think that Royval has a higher finishing upside, more power, and is more dangerous in the jiu-jitsu and striking than than Moreno. So I do think that in that aspect, this is a more dangerous fight for Pantoja. Early pick though, man, this is kind of a 50-50 fight to me, because I think it's going to be wild. I think it's going to be crazy. I do probably favor the durability of Pantoja a little bit more than I'd favor the durability of Royval, but honestly, I'm going to go with Royval to become the new flyweight champion. I just feel like this is his time. I know he makes mistakes, and he might give his back up and get choked, but at the same time, like, I feel like Royval's so live, and I thought for sure Nicolau was going to beat him in the last one, and he knocked him out with that knee right up the middle in round one. So, like, you never know with a guy like Royval. Like, yeah, he can lose, but he's always going to be dangerous. He's always going to be in your face. He's always going to be live for a finish, whether it's sub or knockout, for as long as the fight goes. And Pantoja's live for that as well, because he's a dog. He'll get in your face. He'll throw down. And you got the Cannibal versus Raw Dog. I'm going to raw dog it, man. I'm raw dogging this one. Give me Brandon Royval to become the new UFC flyweight champion. I'm going to go with a club and sub. I think he drops him with a knee or an elbow as he steps in and then locks up that front choke late in the fight. I'm going to go with a 4th round arm-in guillotine submission for Brandon Raw Dog Royval to become the new UFC flyweight champion. In the main event of the evening for the welterweight championship, you have the champion in Leon Rocky Edwards defending against Colby Chaos Covington. Now, does Colby deserve a title shot? No, but is the UFC going to give it to him? 100%. He sells tickets, love him or hate him, even though most people hate him. The guy can fight, the guy puts on a show, And, you know, it's not Usman with the title anymore, so you can sell it because Colby and Leon have never fought. The one thing you're going to say is that the volume striking is going to be on the side of Colby. You'd be correct. The wrestling's on the side of Colby. You'd be correct. The pressure's on the side of Colby. You'd be correct. I think the wrestling, the cage pressure, the overall output that Colby puts out on the feet, it's much higher than Usman, which might make it a little bit more difficult for Leon to find his rhythm against a fighter in Colby, because it's going to be harder for him to set up his counters, going to be harder for him to judge the distance and range when Colby's just, you know, throwing out 300, 400, 500 strikes a fight. I mean, he is very, very active from the beginning until the end. But when it comes to a technical basis, I mean, Leon Edwards is far and above, without a doubt, the more technical striker than Colby Chaos Covington. You know, Colby is the better wrestler, and we've seen Leon have issues with the takedowns with the wrestling in the first fight against Usman, but he was able to fix that up and not get taken down nearly as much in the second fight, where he clearly defeated Kamaru Usman by decision in that fight. So we know that his takedown defense is getting better. His ability to stop the takedowns, his ability to cage wrestle is getting better. However, Usman's a different type of wrestler. You know, Usman is a traditional wrestler, and, you know, he'll push you up to the cage. He'll go with one takedown, but he's really just a one takedown attempt and then break off if he doesn't get it. Colby is, you know, transition from head on the inside single, head on the outside single, double leg, cut the corner, get to the body lock, take him down, put the hooks in, go for the rear naked choke. You know, he's relentless, and he chains his takedown attempts together, kind of like a Khabib, using the wrist ride, breaking down the posture, you know, pulling down the wrist and the forearm, pushing forward with your weight and breaking him down. And it's going to be a much more difficult style of wrestling for Leon Edwards to deal with. But at the same time, this type of striker is nothing like Colby has ever dealt with in his entire career. Leon's the most dangerous and most technical striker on the feet that has probably ever graced the welterweight division, aside from Wonderboy Thompson. He uses his distance and range. He's got very solid elbows off the break inside the clinch, and I think that's something we're going to see him use in this fight against Colby. We saw him use that in the fight with Gunnar Nelson. He dropped him, fractured his eye socket, I believe, broke his orbital socket. I think we're going to see something similar to that because of the heavy wrestling approach that Colby's probably going to use. He's going to look to get in on that clinch and then break off and circle as he breaks with elbowing to the side of whatever side he circles. So if he circles left, he'll use that left elbow off the break. He circles right, he'll use that right elbow off the break. And we know he's dangerous, and we know he has big power. I would say we'd see knees from Leon, but I think Leon's too smart to throw knees. I think if we see any type of kick from him, it's going to be low kicks or calf kicks, and then front kicks or stabbing front kicks to the body against Colby, because it's going to be harder for Colby to catch those, but it'll be harder for him to catch calf kicks. But if he throws traditional Thai style low kicks where they're up on the thigh, Colby can kind of catch it, ride it up his leg, and then drive forward and get the takedowns. But I think jabs, 1-2s, elbows off the break in the clinch, and then calf kicks are going to be the weapons for Leon Edwards. And we saw how difficult it was for Usman to take him down. But again, this is a different style of wrestler with Colby, with the pressure, chain wrestling, and putting takedown attempts together. I think Colby can definitely get it done here if Leon breaks and his cardio fades. But I think the striking of Leon is too much for Colby, man. I mean, we saw him get dropped by Masvidal, which, you know, isn't a bad thing because Masvidal is a really good striker. We saw him get dropped by Usman multiple times. We saw him get knocked out by Usman. Even though the second fight with Usman was much more competitive, I thought maybe Colby could have edged that out. That was at UFC 268. But I think Leon's just on a different level at this point. I think Leon is a much better striker and has the takedown defense to deal with most of the takedowns of Colby. I'm sure he will get a few takedowns. I'm not saying that. But I think it's either Colby by submission or it's Leon by knockout. And based on what I've seen lately, and based on the defensive inefficiencies I've seen with Colby in the striking department, against the best striker in the division, going up against a wrestler in Colby who is probably the best wrestler in the division, but with Leon making improvements to his takedown defense like we saw in the second fight in the rematch against Kamaru at UFC 286, I think this is a Leon Edwards fight all day. I think Leon finishes Colby. I think Leon catches him with an elbow off the break in the clinch, drops him, and knocks him out. I think it's either an elbow or a head kick. Elbow off the break in the clinch or a high kick. He catches Colby on the chin, puts him down, and gets him out of there. So give me Leon Edwards to defend his welterweight championship and do so via a third round knockout. I'm going to go with a third round head kick knockout for Leon Edwards, or that elbow off the break like I said.